Welcome to America's Cannabis Conversation. Heard every Saturday at 4:20 p.m. online at americascannabisconversation.com. Each week, we provide our listeners information, education, and insight into the exploding medical and adult use cannabis industry. You'll hear from industry experts, elected officials, local growers, detractors, and more. Learn how to build your own cannabis business, how to grow the product, what's legal, and where it's legal. Tune in each week to hear the latest industry news and updates from the American Cannabis Industry Association in Washington, tips on investing in cannabis, personal success stories, and more. It's time to join the conversation. And here's your host, Dan Perkins.
This is Dan Perkins with your American Cannabis Conversation. Quick news. Dozens of Los Angeles cannabis retailers raided in the city's largest crackdown. By the time the sun came up on Friday the 13th, cannabis law enforcement agents had seized $8.8 million worth of cannabis products, including some 10,000 counterfeit vape pens and $129,000 in cash from 24 unlicensed cannabis shops in Los Angeles, California. From December 10th to 12th, investigators with the State Bureau of Cannabis Control and the Department of Consumer Affairs Cannabis Enforcement Unit served search warrants at dozens of cannabis retailers, rounding up and arresting staff and confiscating products and cash. The week-long mass raids represent the largest crackdown on the illicit cannabis industry in Los Angeles, and the chief cannabis regulators vowed even more to come. Massachusetts lifts ban on cannabis vaping products. Cannabis regulators in Massachusetts have modified a ban on marijuana vape products that will allow businesses to begin selling newly manufactured goods as soon as retailers can get them on the shelves. However, vape products manufactured before December 12th will remain under quarantine imposed by the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission on November 12th. Under the amended quarantine order, medical marijuana treatment centers and adult use dispensaries will be permitted to sell devices that vaporize cannabis flower or concentrates, provided they comply with the new regulations. Majority of Americans support marijuana legalization. Two more national polls show that the majority of Americans are in favor of legalizing marijuana. A Fox News survey, which involved phone interviews with 1,000 adults from December 8th through the 11th, showed that 63% of respondents supported legalizing the recreational use of marijuana on a national level, while 34% opposed the policy. A Marist poll, conducted in collaboration with the NPR and PBS, surveyed 1,744 Americans from December 9th to 11th. The results similarly showed 62% of respondents saying it was a good idea to legalize cannabis, with 33% stating it would be a bad idea. Michigan begins adult use cannabis sales. Michigan launches its recreational marijuana industry with a limited number of stores open. Michigan's first day of recreational cannabis yielded $221,000 in sales, with customers lining outside 3 Ann Arbor, Michigan dispensaries that were issued licenses for December 1st event. These 3 shops were the only ones in the state offering adult use cannabis that day. Many municipalities have banned recreational sales. And that's your American Cannabis Conversation Quick News. I'm Dan Perkins. On the show today, a conversation will take place with Anthony Planas of Banyan Hill, who will take a look back at 2019 and give us a year in review. One of our newest contributors, Emily Flippen, will talk about a new product available from Motley Fool for a limited time only. Our cannabis doctor on call, Dr. Jordan Tishler, will be here to talk about sleep disorder and how cannabis can help. We are adding a new contributor today, Ellis Smith, who is chairman and founder of American Cannabis Company, and he's going to talk today as a serial cannabis entrepreneur about how to start your business. And finally, we'll have some segments from the floor of the Cannabis Convention in Las Vegas with Chase Roberts. Let's get started with the conversation. Welcome back to the conversation. Joining us is our regular, Anthony Planas from Banyan Hill Publishers. And we're talking today with Anthony about a look backward, and then we're going to have another segment with him in a later show where he'll talk about what he's going to see happening in 2020. So welcome to the conversation, Anthony.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dan.
Sure. So let's start off by taking a look at 2019 and the expectations going in at the turn of the year, what happened and where we are at the end of the year. So you run with that for a while.
Yeah, so as far as things that happened that I was kind of expecting was a fire sale, so to speak, in U.S. cannabis operators. That was a sector that I was wary of going into 2019. What I was surprised about, though, was just how hard the sector was hit by scandals and by the vaping crisis, and that really laid into the negative sentiment around the sector. So I think as far as expectations and surprises, those were the biggest ones for me in this past year.
So let me just I'll make sure I understood what you were saying. Are you saying that your expectation or the expectation was that the American cannabis companies were going to have a difficult time in 2019? Did I hear that correct, or did I get that wrong?
Yeah, no, that's correct, because basically what I was looking at was just how many companies were moving into these spaces, and just to, the states don't open up all of the legalizations the same way. And so when they legalize, there's all these hurdles and delays and things like that. And so I saw all of these companies kind of rushing for the door, and in every state they have to set up operations differently. And I knew that they wouldn't all go smoothly. And so that meant that a lot of these companies were basically going to go on sale. They were going to declare bankruptcy, and their assets would basically go up for auction. And so that made me weary about getting into the U.S.-based operations going into 2019. But now that that's happened, we've seen a pretty big division between, the fakers and the ones that are actually going to make it. And even within those, there's no guarantee, but it's at least a fair fight now between a lot of the names that are still standing or at least holding their ground.
I'm not trying to puff you up, but were you ahead of the market? Was the market as bearish as you were?
No, I think the market kind of got hyped up, and this wasn't just myself. This was speaking with other analysts as well, people that were in the industry and trying to get a beat on what was going on. And basically what I was being told was that some of the early movers were just getting outbid on everything because there was just so much money flowing into it, and they were just saying, this doesn't match our models. So the prices on things are just getting bid up way too much, and they said, we're going to step back because there's no way that this is sustainable. So in speaking with people like that were really involved early on, that's how I came to that conclusion.
So when we look at what's going on and what happened, the vape crisis, did that accelerate, exacerbate, make the correction even worse? What do you think happened there?
Yeah, so the scandals with some of these companies, CV Sciences and another brand got called out for, I believe it was Curaleaf, but don't quote me on that. Got called out for having CBD products that weren't labeled appropriately, and so they got taken off shelves and got warning letters from the FDA. And then we had the vaping crisis, and basically every one of these crises served to scare investors away, which drew money out of the playing field. And when there's less money out there, they can't boost up weak balance sheets anymore. And so when investor money dries up, it really becomes difficult. And so you find which companies are profitable or have good cash flow and close to profitable, and which ones are just leeching off of investor money.
We had talked about this once before, about the fact that that people were paying ridiculous prices, and it reminded me of the dot-com bubble in 1999 to 2000, when that whole thing just exploded. People were buying stocks at multiples against earnings that there were no earnings, and people were just being insane about what they were doing. And it appears that we went through that again here. But the difference this time, I think, Anthony, is that you didn't have a lot of what I call institutional buying in the cannabis space because of the fear of the illegal nature of the cannabis itself. So we didn't have big mutual funds, big pension funds having any significant portion of their money invested in cannabis stocks. So that the damage really was more to the retail side of the market than it was to the institutional side of the market. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. So the size of the cannabis bubble compared to the dot-com bubble, it's a fraction of the dot-com, and like you said, a lot of this was retail or more speculative money, but you didn't see a lot of big institutions taking big bets within the cannabis sector, because there was, when you have this kind of old money approach to it, one of the first rules is to not lose money, and you don't want to break the law and get yourself into trouble. And so they kind of take a more conservative approach. And so it was really more speculative money that chased after it in a lot of these cases.
We are talking with our money guy, Anthony Planas from Banyan Hill Publishers. We have this big shakeout. You said on a couple of previous shows that you thought we were fairly close to a bottom, but you weren't looking for any quick reacceleration. Do you still think we're close to a bottom?
Yeah, I think within the U.S. operators, we're already seeing a turnaround in some of the better names. And I think that's because we've baked in a lot of the bad news, the controversies, the cash crunch that's going on, and we have names that are able to have sustainable businesses and operations in the current environment, and we're seeing the numbers from that. And so I think we're already seeing the turnaround in the good names.
Yeah. Were there any surprises in 2019 that you honestly, with your crystal ball, didn't see coming? That shocked you?
Just a lot of the negativity around the Canadian market, how slow that rolled out. The rollout has been a lot slower. There's been a lot fewer dispensaries that have opened up. And really, some of the companies that have failed to really build their operations correctly, even with this tighter environment, surprised me. And so the American market went about as expected in my book, but the Canadian market was a big upset for me, in my mind.
I was reading an article recently about cannabis in Canada, and one province had something like 300 dispensaries in it. Another province had like 5 in the whole province. So that it appears both domestically and foreign, meaning Canada and the United States, both, for lack of a better description, Anthony, both governments are having a difficult time trying to figure out what to do with this business.
Yeah, absolutely. And, some of that is to be expected because, it's been illegal for just so long. And this is really, they're trying to tackle something new here. And so some of these are taking a very slow approach to them. Some are deciding to tax very heavily. And then others, kind of like Colorado, Washington, and Oregon, there's almost like a reckless approach as far as legalizing it and just opening it up so quickly. It's interesting to see all of the different attempts and how they pan out. And I think it's going to be a good learning experience for other nations that are looking to legalize, such as Mexico.
Yeah, that's going to be they're talking about Mexico legalization making it the largest state-sponsored cannabis in the world.
Yeah,
because it'll be bigger than Canada.
Absolutely.
So Well, we've been speaking with Anthony Planas, who's been talking to us about what has happened so far this year, and we're going to invite him to come back in a week or so, and he's going to give us his opinion of what's likely to happen in 2020 and beyond, and things for us to watch for and to think about. So, Anthony, we thank you for joining us today. Tell our listeners where they can get a hold of you.
Yeah, so you can go to banyanhill.com or go to YouTube and search my name, Anthony Planas, for all my weekly updates. And thanks for having me.
You're listening to America's Cannabis Conversation on the W420 Radio Network.
Welcome back to the conversation. And joining us today is our regular guest, our cannabis doctor on call, Dr. Jordan Tishler. And we're continuing the series of what you need to do and how you can deal with some of the things that are approved in various states for treatment with cannabis. So, Doctor, welcome to the conversation today.
Thank you for having me back, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So what we're going to talk about, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk about the inability to sleep, whether it's called insomnia, whether it's called sleep deprivation. It's a serious problem for millions upon millions of Americans. And this is one area where cannabis can help. The doctor is going to talk to us today about what are the various elements of sleep deprivation. And then we're going to invite him back for another presentation on what we can do using cannabis to treat it and what can we expect. So, doctor, help the audience understand the broad category of insomnia or sleep deprivation.
Well, as you pointed out, insomnia is, I think, the number 2 complaint that Americans have and present to their doctors. And it's, and number 1 being pain, which we talked about last time. Insomnia is, again, like pain, one of those areas where, despite the vast, number of people who are suffering from it, we have fairly few good medical options. There are some prescription medications, and they work reasonably well for some people, but not for all people, and sometimes they come with side effects, particularly grogginess the next day, that oftentimes make them not really usable for people. When we think about insomnia in a medical context, we sort of try to break these down into a few different categories. And the reason that that's valuable to us is because it helps us then figure out what to do about it. So some people have trouble falling asleep. I mean, that seems like the obvious one, right? They get into bed and they sit there or lie there and they can't go to sleep and they toss and they turn. They're uncomfortable. They're thinking about how much they really need to get some sleep because tomorrow is going to be a hard day. And the more they're at that, the more they are unable to sleep, and it becomes this vicious cycle. So that's sort of the getting to sleep category. And there are a number of different ways that we can address those folks. And then there's sort of a different category of people who get to sleep just fine, but find themselves awakening too early, before they've gotten a full night's rest, and then they're awake and unable to go back to sleep. And again, that vicious cycle starts to come around where it's like, God, I need more sleep. I can't get more sleep. The more you think about it, the worse it gets, et cetera. And then there's a third category, which is sort of the mixed category, the people who have both problems going on simultaneously, and that's certainly a challenge. So those are sort of the broad categories of sleep disturbance. And then there are some other phenomena that kind of fall into the sleep disturbance category that are related to other things. So you had mentioned in a previous conversation people with sleep apnea, who are people who, when they do fall asleep, then have a tendency to stop breathing. And obviously that's not a good thing. And right. What happens is eventually as they become oxygen deprived and build up the carbon dioxide in their blood. They wake up, and they wake up gasping and thrashing, which is not good for their bed partners either. And then, they may not even be awake enough that they realize that they've done this, but they've done it in enough that it's not good and conducive to their restorative sleep. And then they go back to sleep, and the cycle repeats. And so, in fact, these people can have, 50, 100 more awakenings during the course of the night, which means, in fact, they're not getting that restful or restorative sleep that we're looking for. There are a number of other medical issues, heart failure, where the fluids build up in the lungs, and all sorts of things that kind of all contribute to this sort of difficulty sleeping or non-restorative sleep. So if people are struggling with sleep issues, the very first thing I think that they need to do, if it's a persistent thing, is to talk to their doctors and make sure that there's nothing sort of more specifically medical going on, like the sleep apnea or heart failure or any range of other things, so that we're not, barking up the wrong tree and missing a diagnosis that we need to jump on.
So, Doctor, when we talked earlier, I indicated that my wife and I had started this foundation called Songs and Stories for Soldiers, and we specialized in working with VA facilities and veteran service organizations across the country. We're in about 130 facilities now. And when we first started working, we met some people at the Carrick Brain Center outside of Dallas, Texas, and they had a treatment program for what we call special operations personnel. These are people who are highly trained individuals who operate many times on their own in combat positions, and they usually pay a very high price. And when I was talking to Dr. Carrick at the time, he said to me, he says, I have all the respect in the world for the Veterans Administration, but when I get a patient that comes to me who's been treated for sleep deprivation at the VA, the first thing I have to do is I have to have them take a drug test, because certain narcotics and sleep aids actually prevent the body from relaxing and resting and recharging. When we started talking about using cannabis as a treatment, he said that they cannot use it on active duty soldiers, because if they're tested with the THC in their blood, they're basically dismissed from the military because of the drugs.
That's a very bad thing.
Has our life changed so much that we have such high incidence of sleep deprivation, or is it just that we're more aware of it?
I think that's a very good question. I think it's all of the above, unfortunately. I hate to give those kind of vague answers, but I think that we have seen significant changes in our lifestyle over the last century or so that are far-ranging, right? There's obviously a significant amount of stress in our society. There's also a lot of multitasking in our society and required of us in daily life. And, one of the things about that is it leads to this sort of rumination in the downtime that can, in fact, impede sleep. There's some discussion about the stressors not just sort of being psychologically effective, but also raising cortisol levels, and that can affect sleep-wake cycles and such like that. Many of us work and exist across multiple time zones. We're flying around, obviously that flight is a newish technology, but that stuff wreaks havoc on our circadian rhythms. And it's not just sort of the jet lag that we all kind of acknowledge and experience, but these things can have very long-lasting effects over months. Similarly, people work night shifts, and worse yet, swing shifts. Swing shifts, I think, have largely kind of been downplayed over the last 10 to 15 years because the literature on the effects on people's mental health and performance have turned out to be so bad. But then, as you point out, we're also all glued to our phones and our computers. And not only does that include, all that multitasking I was talking about, but it entails a lot of light being shot into our eyes, which can confuse our brains as to what we should be doing when, in terms of sleep and wake and stuff like that. So there's a large literature that's evolving now around non-pharmaceutical approaches to the treatment of insomnia in various forms. And while I don't think that there's anything in that is sort of a magic bullet, and I'm not sure that there is a magic bullet here, but it talks a lot about things like sleep hygiene, which isn't about, brushing your teeth, but rather about how do you set up an environment to be conducive to sleep, and making it dark and make it quiet, and make sure that there is not light, not just specifically dark, but that you're not sitting there while you're trying to go to sleep looking at your iPhone, all of those sorts of things. And then there's a large move to use various psychotherapies, particularly cognitive behavioral therapy, which has actually been shown to be effective. And ironically, in light of what I was just saying, one of the few areas where the computer can actually be helpful, because there are cognitive behavioral therapies that you can do online that actually can help with sleep issues.
I want to close this segment by asking you, there's probably a lot of people in this country that don't even know they have sleep deprivation, and maybe listening to this program and are thinking about it. Are there any things that you can give as pointers, things to look for to see if you've got a sleep problem for our listeners?
Yeah, I think, frankly, that I would venture to say that there's nobody who couldn't use some more sleep. So I think that that's a starting point. What we look for are things like excessive daytime sleepiness. Do you fall asleep at the drop of a hat? Do you find that you're yearning for a nap all the time? Those sorts of things. Then there are sort of cognitive issues. You're having trouble focusing on the tasks in front of you. That sort of thing. Is your work performance tailing off? Then there are some sleep-related things like, does your partner report that you thrash in bed? Does your partner report that you snore loudly, or that you even stop breathing? Those sorts of things. That's kind of the constellation of things I would look at first blush. And then obviously, if any of those sort of things are positive, then I would suggest that the next step is to talk to your health professional, because they're going to be able to help you get deeper into that discussion and really ferret out what's going on. And what's going on then leads to the most appropriate and most beneficial therapy.
We've been speaking with Dr. Jordan Tishler, our cannabis physician, doctor on call. Doctor, how do people get a hold of you?
People can reach me by going to my website, which is inhalemd.com. Again, that's inhalemd.com. And you can reach me right through the web, and we're pretty good about getting back to people quickly.
Thank you. We've been speaking with Dr. Jordan Tishler. It's always a pleasure to be with you, Doctor, and we'll talk to you real soon.
Pleasure to be with you.
America's newest and fastest growing cannabis-focused radio network is expanding across the country and looking to add to our sales and marketing team. America's Cannabis Conversation offers listeners insight and information on the exploding world of cannabis. It also gives advertisers the opportunity to reach a hyper-targeted audience, literally neighborhood by neighborhood, in markets all across the country. We're looking for a few motivated individuals that want to essentially run their own local business in markets like Boston, Las Vegas, Reno, Orlando, and more. To learn more about this exciting opportunity or to apply, visit americascannabisconversation.com.
Segments from the floor of the Cannabis Convention in Las Vegas with Chase Roberts.
Hi, this is Chase Roberts, reporter for W420 Radio Network. I am here with the Cassandra Farrington, CEO and co-founder of Marijuana Business Daily, and MJ BizCon. Hello, how are you?
I am great. Look at this great show that's going on.
This is an amazing show. I know you've been into business since 2011 with your partner, and I was just really curious to find out what you feel like the biggest changes in this industry have been in the last 8 years.
It's absolutely got to do with the size and scope of how the industry has exploded around us. And it's really interesting to see how MJBizCon has been a really key part of that, as everything that happens here, all the deal making, all of the educational content, all of the networking, all of the vendor sourcing that we see year after year here, how that gets out into the cannabis universe, helps this industry grow exponentially, and then comes back into this show the next year to do it all over again. It's been such a change to see how the industry has accelerated over that time.
That's totally amazing. And I wanted to ask, too, what is your main objective when you're putting the conference together?
Our objective each and every day, now whether it's both through the conference and through the MJBiz Daily, which is what we actually publish each and every day, our objective is to help this industry grow. Figure out what people in the business need to know to run their businesses better today and tomorrow and the day after that. Help them understand that information so they can navigate their path forward successfully.
Okay, great. One last question. How does it feel to be a woman in such a pivotal role in this industry?
I am so proud of what not just me, but so many female entrepreneurs and my fellow female CEOs in this industry have accomplished, and I'm very excited for what the future holds.
Cassandra, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome to the conversation. Today, our good friend, who's been with us now several times, Emily Flippen, is going to talk to about her work in selecting marijuana stocks. Welcome to the conversation, Emily.
Thank you again for having me, Dan.
You're welcome. So the last time you were on, you talked about the special offer, which was relatively short for the Marijuana Masters program. What other ways do people have with working with you or Motley Fool to get involved in the cannabis space?
Well, there's lots of ways to get involved in cannabis that don't involve subscribing to the Marijuana Masters program, which is, a cannabis-based portfolio. So if someone is just interested in cannabis, there are lots of safer ways to play the market. The Motley Fool's flagship products, Stock Advisor, and Rule Breakers, which are constantly open, and you can go to fool.com to read more about those products. Those companies have, I'm going to put it in quotes, cannabis companies in them. They're companies that are not cannabis producers, not even cannabis picks and shovels companies, but companies that have seen a lot of tailwinds as a result of cannabis. So in my mind, there are ways that you can learn about the industry. There are ways to be involved that don't put as much of your capital at risk if you are a more conservative investor.
Do you follow or are you familiar with many ETFs in this space?
I am, and I'm actually not a big fan of cannabis ETFs. Now, there are lots of investors and lots of subscribers to Marijuana Masters who enjoy dabbling in marijuana ETFs. Perhaps the best known is the MJ ETF, which was one of the first cannabis ETFs. However, these ETFs tend to be market cap weighted funds, which means that they buy a larger proportion of shares in bigger companies. Now, what this results in is you, if you buy the ETF, being overexposed to some of the largest and thus most overvalued cannabis companies. What I tend to do in my job is I look for smaller, lesser-known cannabis companies that have a competitive edge, and then I choose allocation for the marijuana portfolio based off of that competitive edge. A lot of these ETFs are just going after the big dogs in the industry, and as a result, you'll see that these ETFs are down, 60, 50% over their highs. So there's lots of volatility in ETFs, and over the long term, I think a lot of these ETFs will be fine. But if you're an individual investor and you go out there and you buy some of these ETFs and you see it go down 20 or 30%, you may be confused. You may pull your money out and then automatically lock in those losses simply because you don't know what they're doing. And ultimately what they're doing is usually buying shares of very overvalued companies.
Emily, I've been managing money for almost 50 years, and I refuse to pay a price-earnings multiple that has triple digits in it, no matter what the industry is. But what I find about in the cannabis space, and you can help me with this and help our listeners with this, it's really tough to find information about the companies. Many of these companies, which are cash companies, because there's no banking provisions in the law, have difficulty in putting together reliable financial statements. And I'm not saying that they're misleading. I'm just saying that with cash, there's lots of things that you can and can't do in your business. How do you help people figure out what's the best way to begin their own personal research in following these little-known companies?
I think the best way is to understand the regulations and the environment in which the company is operating. A lot of these cannabis companies are listed and based out of Canada, which means they report under IFRS. IFRS, unlike U.S.-based GAAP, if you're listed on one of the major exchanges, doesn't require an auditor to attest to things like internal controls. Now, that's probably meaningless for the average retail investor, but it's essentially saying that these auditors don't need to say, hey, look, the numbers they report, auditors just take the numbers and they say, is there anything materially wrong with them? They don't testify to whether or not they are accurate to represent the core underlying business. And so when you look at internal controls, like you mentioned, it's all a cash-based business. The internal controls for most of these cannabis companies are extremely weak. So a lot of times management doesn't even know what numbers to report because so much of this is going on in cash. It requires it's a very faulty system that a lot of companies have set up. However, if you look at companies listed on major exchanges here in the U.S., these are not pure-play cannabis companies because you cannot list on the major exchanges if you're a pure-play cannabis company in the U.S., but a lot of these ancillary picks and shovels companies, they have auditors that will attest to their internal controls. Reading the auditor's report is a great place to start to understand, hey, where may there be issues? And also just looking at the financial statements themselves. Granted, it's not going to save you a lot of the times because, like I said, if auditors can't catch it, it's kind of ridiculous to expect you or I to catch it. However, looking at them, reading management's comments, if you see a company, Aurora Cannabis to me is the most obvious company to pull out for this, but if you see a company that has a tangible book value per share of 44 cents, that's to say that the vast majority of their assets are intangible assets, they're losing a lot of money, all of this stuff is readily available on the financial statements of Aurora, that should be the immediate red flag to you that something's not right here. And so take the time, understand the regulatory environment, and read over the financial statements. It's kind of the minimum that you need to do before you invest in cannabis.
Emily, there's a lot of people who buy on emotion. They buy because their brother-in-law said they should buy something. They don't really understand what it is they're buying. And when we have a correction like we've seen and you mentioned, perhaps as much as a 60% decline in the value of some of these equities, people lose confidence. They didn't have necessarily confidence going in because they were depending upon somebody else's recommendation who may or may not have known anything, but they put their money in and they see it down 60% and they start to panic and they'll pull it out or they wonder, have I made a serious mistake? 60% decline is more than a bear market in an asset class. Are we, in your opinion, do you think we're at a buying entry point, or do we have some more downside?
Personally, I've been buying over the past year. I give very little thought to the short-term market moves that other investors may do. If you look at studies, and you'll read studies every day about why individual investors underperform even just index funds. And every time it comes back to investor psychology, people buy and sell too often. They're bad at determining when's the right buying point and when's the right selling point, and they underperform as a result. So in my opinion, you have two options as an investor. Either you take somebody else's advice and you forget about it and you don't touch it, you hold it for 5, 7, 10 years, and then you come back to it, and more likely than not, you've made money on that investment. You might have lost 60% at some point. Amazon stock, for instance, lost upwards of 60, 70% of its value in the early 2000s. But as long as you continue to hold, you'd be fine. Now, I'm not saying cannabis stocks are Amazon, but I am saying this is the trend that you'll see with investors. The best investors tend to be people who do not look at their portfolio every day. The flip side of that is I know the majority of people who do go out of their way to buy and sell stocks probably enjoy looking at their portfolio every day. In that case, what I say to you is develop a strong investing thesis. If your friend tells you to buy Aurora Cannabis, which please don't buy Aurora Cannabis, but if somebody tells you to buy that stock, lay out why you're buying it, lay out where you think it's going to go, and what would change your mind. And then if Aurora Cannabis is down 60%, come back to those points and ask yourself, has my answer to any of these things changed? Has there been any material change in my thesis for buying the company? If not, let it ride. And so my opinion to that is to say, I'm not a trader. I don't trade. I mean, the last stock I sold, I think, gosh, it must have been a year and a half ago. I sold Best Buy, and it was a mistake. And so individual investors are terrible at selling stock. So don't sell. You're not a trader. You're an investor. You're buying a piece of a business for the long term. Whether or not we're at a bottom in the market right now, it's anyone's guess. But I've been buying cannabis for the past year. I expect I'll be continuing to buy cannabis in 2020, likely 2021, likely 2022. And I would expect over time these investments, maybe not Aurora, but these investments will start to pay off.
We're speaking with Emily Flippen from Motley Fool. You talked about being long-term investors, and I understand that. We talked about that a lot of people use emotion. Americans are very emotional about their investments. If we got decriminalization of marijuana and we had an opportunity to be able to manufacture and ship across state borders, wouldn't that change the dynamics of this business dramatically?
There's probably 1,000 things that could change, especially here in the U.S., that could dramatically improve or hurt the prospects of cannabis-based companies. These changes seem easy, and I'm a big supporter of believing that they're coming sooner rather than later. Federal legalization to me feels like a win, not an if. However, it's important to realize that these are longer processes than people may give them credit for. 2019, part of the reason why it was such a bad year for cannabis was because in the U.S., the markets didn't live up to their potential. Not only are we seeing California, obviously, with their tax increases hurting the legal market, but New York, New Jersey, they failed to pass any sort of legalization bill. And these are liberal states. These are states that it was kind of considered a lock for them to pass these bills. And so far, Illinois is the only state here in the U.S. that has passed legalization through the legislature. And I believe that moving forward, we're going to see states have to use their legislature to pass these sorts of bills. And that's a long, hard, complicated process. It requires politicians and state officials to agree on the intricate details of legalization. In New York and New Jersey, there is very little disagreement about whether or not they wanted pot to be decriminalized, if they wanted pot to be legalized on a state level. It was, how do we implement this? And the fact that they weren't able to agree on how to implement it means that these changes like cross-border shipping and even just state legalization are going to be challenging. Now, like I said, I don't want to paint doom and gloom for the cannabis industry because it does feel like a domino effect. And I think as we see states, Illinois laid out a great blueprint for other states to follow. So as we see states start to legalize, hopefully it will make it easier for other states too, but it is a long process. And going into an election year, people's minds are all over the place. So I think right now there are 9 states that are likely to have some sort of cannabis legalization or decriminalization on their November 2020 ballots. And we'll see then just how easy it is or hard it is for them to pass these legalization efforts.
Terrific. We've been speaking to Emily Flippen from the Motley Fool organization, and she is a co-manager of Marijuana Masters. Thank you for joining us today, Emily. And where can they find information about you and what your thoughts are at the moment about marijuana investors?
I'm on Twitter, so you can find me at Flippen_Emily on Twitter. I do love to talk about companies, so feel free to, shoot me a tweet.
Thank you. We've been speaking to Emily Flippen, and if you didn't hear all of this interview, you can go to W420radionetwork.com, and you can download this show and other shows that Emily's been on and other guests for free. This is Dan Perkins. Thank you for joining the conversation. Segments from the floor of the Cannabis Convention in Las Vegas with Chase Roberts.
Hi, this is Chase Roberts, reporter for W420 Radio Network. I am here at MJ BizCon in Las Vegas, and today I'm talking with Chad Connor. He is the CEO of Pure Ratios. Hi, Chad. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm good. Kind of crazy here, right?
Yeah, it's busy already. We just opened too.
So, Chad, why don't you tell me a little bit about your products? What exactly do you guys provide for people?
Actually, we have a very unique medical cannabis line. We do both cannabis products and CBD hemp. So we do both channels. And really our unique niche is, for example, my background, I've been an herbalist and acupuncturist for over 22 years. Also, my head formulator, she's an herbalist and acupuncturist for 20 years. So we really look at cannabis from the herbalist perspective. And we've developed products that really synergize not just cannabinoids, but other herbs. For example, and we also have really exciting medical products. I'll give you an example. Our flagship product is a 96-hour transdermal patch. So it's a reservoir patch that you put on and it transmits for 96 hours.
That kind of sounds like replacing some kind of pharmaceutical pain patch, but in a healthy way.
Absolutely. And on top of it, it's a waterproof adhesive. You can put it on, shower, swim, and all the excipients or the skin penetration enhancers that actually allow the cannabinoids to go into your body are all from natural sources. We don't use any chemicals, and the patch, it works. It works really well for things like pain.
Have you found that doctors have been receptive to this already, or is it kind of like introducing a new concept and letting them know it's there?
A little bit of both.
So, Chad, as we were discussing, do you feel like doctors are aware of your product? Are they willing to make the switch from pharmaceutical to all natural?
You know, it depends on the doctor. For example, I work a lot with natural healthcare practitioners. I educate them on how to bring cannabis in their practice. They're very, very interested. MDs or Western doctors, they're more and more interested. They don't have a lot of education, but we're seeing a lot of interest because working with the endocannabinoid system with cannabis, helping the body create balance is pretty incredible. So it really depends, but it is getting better and better.
Yeah, because I feel like it's kind of trending. It's just going to get bigger and bigger. And please tell me, how did you start your company? How did this come about?
You know, actually we started 4 years ago. So we've been around the block. We started in California. We're a San Diego-based company. But now we've expanded. We have our THC products in California, and we license them in other states. So we're actually in Oregon, Washington State, Massachusetts, Puerto Rico. Also, we're just licensing in the UK, so we're going internationally also. But we have also CBD hemp products we sell in U.S. and international.
Fantastic. Do you have any parting words for W420 radio listeners?
All I have to say that this plant is magical because it's an adaptogenic plant, means it's creating balance. So if you're working on the medical side, it's incredible, and actually as an herbalist, it's incredible to have a plant that creates balance and then able to strengthen those therapeutic directions. So it's just an incredible plant. We're discovering more and more, and it's just awesome to be part of the industry.
What is your web address?
It's pureratios.com.
Chad Connor, thank you so much for the interview. I appreciate it.
Hello and welcome to the conversation. Joining us today is Ellis Smith, who we call our American Cannabis serial entrepreneur. He's going to join us on a regular basis to talk about his experience in many facets of the cannabis industry that he's been involved in over the years, to try and help you, the listener, who's thinking about getting into the cannabis business, what it's like and what they should expect. Ellis, welcome to the show. And tell us a little bit about yourself, your company, and how long you've been in the cannabis business.
Well, Dan, thank you for having me on today. I'm excited to be on. And thanks to all the listeners to tuning in. So I've been involved in the regulated cannabis space since 2010. I owned my first dispensary and cultivation facility in Boulder, Colorado, called the Village Green Society. We were a vertical business. I ran the cultivation side, and we had a dispensary that we also operated. I operated that business for 3 years and sold that company and started my current company, American Cannabis Company. We really started this company to go into all the new markets that were opening up back in 2013. We had Connecticut, Massachusetts, Minnesota, some very, very competitive markets where they're giving out limited licensing. And so we were hired by groups to come in and help with that application process. During that time, we were also doing financial modeling, business plans, doing design work, and really kind of doing all the things it takes to get these businesses up and started. And with the successes of them winning these licenses, we help them do the build out, the construction, hire and train all the employees, staff them, and deploy all the standard operating procedures. And so we've had great successes over the last 7 years doing this from all over the U.S. in very competitive markets, as well as supporting some of the very large licensed producers in the Health Canada market as well. And so to date, we've built about 1 million square foot of grow space, and we really pride ourselves on that operations that we've done over the last 7 years. We've deployed probably 30-plus dispensaries across the U.S. as well, and understand the extraction side of the business too. So we're very well versed in all sides of the business. We also aren't just consultants. We are getting back into the ownership and operation side of the industry as well. We've got some equity stakes and some license arrangements in different markets across the U.S. and even getting back operational here in Colorado now that they have passed a law allowing public companies to own licenses here. So in a nutshell, that's kind of who we are as a service company. We also do manufacture some products. We have a living soil that is an organic standard living soil that we tend to grow our cannabis with. We call it free-range or cage-free cannabis. We also manufacture shipping containers that are turnkey growing units so that you can have these things show up on your site very fast, like a speed-to-market type product. So we aren't just a services company. We are also a products company. But in a nutshell, that's my kind of 2-minute elevator pitch on who we are.
So, ladies and gentlemen, you can understand why we've picked Ellis to be our serial entrepreneur for the cannabis industry. What did you do before you got involved in cannabis?
Well, I have a very unique background. I did spend 5 years in the specialty cut flower industry, and that's where I really cut my teeth on large-scale production and being exposed to those types of experiences. But I also do have a unique experience where I have a background in education in avalanche forecasting and snow science. I was training to be a mountain guide, and part of that task comes along with avalanche forecasting and snow science. So I spent many years working in that environment. And then I also made ski films and adventure travel documentaries around skiing for many years along that pathway. So I'm a ski bum at heart. I am a true cannabis entrepreneur. I've been around this plant for well over 23 years. I've been growing it. It's a thread that's been in my life that I cannot get away from. I don't think I've tried to, but it's something that I am passionate about. I'm a steward of the plant. I'm constantly trying to learn how I can be a better grower, how I can be a better businessman in the space. I tell people working in this industry allows me to be the best person that I could be. And so I really enjoy what I get to do in this space.
We're talking with Ellis Smith, our serial entrepreneur for cannabis. So let's talk a little bit about what you've learned in the years that you've been involved with cannabis from the standpoint of a business. It seemed to me that in some respects, it came out of the chute much like the dot-com bubble, and companies couldn't spend the money fast enough to try and make investments in cannabis. That's kind of come to a stop, or has it?
You know, it has come to a stop. It has slowed down quite a bit. You know, there was a feeding frenzy over the last couple of years where the investors were hot to try to come and throw money at this industry. I think now that's slowed down quite a bit. That whole sex appeal or sexiness of investing in cannabis has kind of slowed down now as investors are getting a little bit smarter. We're seeing some saturation in some markets. Some markets are slow to get operational, and some investors may not have seen the quick return they were hoping and expecting. And so through just time, some of these investors have quickly heard through some of their friends and peers that, you know, it's not as sexy as they thought it was. It really is a lot of work that goes into this. It is not a get-rich-quick scheme. Now, don't get me wrong. You can be successful in cannabis and make very good money at this. But it's going to take time. It doesn't happen overnight. And I think these are some of the realities that some of these investors have really finally come to their senses.
With the dot-com bubble, we found companies that were selling at prices that were outrageous. They had no earnings, and they were selling based on forward earnings projections at 15, 30, 50, 100 times projected earnings. Here we have a slightly different issue in that we've got a product that people can buy. But has the industry been overbuilt with mom and pops, and are they about to go the way?
I think in some markets, those have been the backbone of setting up, an industry in a specific state. Like in Colorado, I'll give you a prime example. They would give anybody a license that had a heartbeat and they could pass a background check. And so this is what we saw here in Colorado. And, they were the backbone. They created this industry. Now that we've got very sophisticated businessmen who've come into the space and have really created some competition, these mom and pops are going away. And you're seeing kind of a roll-up with some of these what I'll call distressed assets compared to some of their competitors who are functioning very well in the space. So in a place like Colorado, yeah, we are kind of seeing these mom and pops now get gobbled up by some of the bigger players, or some of them are just dissolving. But we are seeing some of these folks get pushed out. And so the big boys are coming in. The folks with the acumen and that understand big business are coming in to take that place. But I think in a lot of these markets, it is a foundation to get these industries started, and some markets are allowing them to kind of be that backbone, and others are not. Meaning, like, let's say Minnesota, for instance, they gave out 2 licenses, so there's no opportunity for the mom and pop to come in. But what I will say is we're seeing a trend now, and I love this happening. Places like Illinois and California have a social equity component, where now they're going to the folks who have been impacted by the war on drugs, whether it's their family members or either themselves have been arrested for cannabis and have some type of misdemeanor or even higher infraction. These folks get first right of refusal or priority for licensing, giving them the opportunity to come in and work in the space. And that can be good or bad the way you look at it. These folks may not have the acumen to come in and compete, but hopefully they find a good partnership with a group that will come in and mentor them, empower them, give them the ability to function professionally in the space, and not just buy them out and send them home with a fat check. Let them, learn something in business and come in because they were impacted by that war on drugs. We know what it can do to them. And so I'm psyched to see that they are trying to create this marketplace in some states that allow that mom and pop to still function and thrive. So, I don't know if that answered your question directly, but we're kind of seeing many different functions of the space all across states as it's so fragmented.
If you believe, as I do, that there's going to be significant consolidation of a lot of mom and pops in many states, then the profit dynamics are going to change, and the expansion. The problem in California is they don't have enough dispensaries. There are whole counties that have no dispensaries at all, or a county has one dispensary. And so it would appear that I live in Southwest Florida, and Florida just came out of a lawsuit where the court said you don't have enough dispensaries. There were a limited number of licenses. And I just want to clarify a point from my perspective. A dispensary license isn't just one storefront. It can be up to 25 or 30 storefronts for a license. I wonder if we have a situation where in Florida, where there were 2 dispensary licenses that were sold in Miami, between the 2 of them about $100 million for the licenses. As we see more and more consolidation in the industry, are licenses going to be cheaper to buy in the secondary market than they are to buy from the state?
And that's a very good question. And these are the things that, in some states, yes, and some states, no. I think it varies. And so you're kind of hitting the nail on the head here. It's state by state. It varies. It really does.
Right. We have been talking to our new contributor, Ellis Smith. He's going to be our American Cannabis serial entrepreneur, and he's going to be joining us on a regular basis. Ellis, we're out of time, but where can people reach you?
Please look at my website, AmericanCannabisCompany.com, or go to the ACCLife.com, same thing. Follow me on any social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, under Ellis Smith, and I look forward to hearing from you. Reach out to me. Love to hear from you.
Thank you for joining us. If you missed part of this conversation with Ellis, you can go to our website, w420radionetwork.com, and download this and other shows. Thank you for joining us today, Ellis.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking part in America's Cannabis Conversation. To hear this show in its entirety or to hear any of our archive shows, log on to americascannabisconversation.com and tune in next Saturday at 4:20 p.m. for the next installment of America's Cannabis Conversation.